Okay, how is everyone? Everyone good? So I didn't realize we were holding LUG Radio Live in an old folks' home. Is everyone good? Yeah. Excellent. Well, welcome to the Mass Debate. The purpose of this session is to grill these 5 lovely individuals here. So I'm going to introduce them. We've got Ted Haegar here, who works for Bungie Labs, and they produce like a web development framework that's online. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. Then we've got Jane Hogbin. Emma is the founder of HICTech up in Canada, and she's a big proponent in women in open source. So, in fact, give Ted a round of applause.
Woo! Web developer IDE.
Yeah. And give Emma a round of applause.
Canadian women. Yeah.
Okay, we've also got Miguel di Icaza, who's the co-founder of the GNOME project, and...
Not the GNOME project, no.
The GNOME.
Oh, GNOME.
You nearly had a heart attack then, didn't you?
Just leave it at that. Let's move on.
And he's also got something vaguely to do with mono as well. So very deeply involved in mono. So give Miguel a round of applause. And then, of course, we've got Jeremy Allison. There is really nothing more you can say about Jeremy Allison. Very involved in Samba, and of course a large proponent of free software. And then, of course, finally, we've got Benjamin Mako Hill. Give him a round of applause. Mako.
Very nice to meet you, dude.
Nice to meet you.
Beautiful.
People have been saying wonderful things about you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
People that crash your place.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Finished? So Mako is... are you a fellow with the FSF?
I'm on the board of directors of the FSF, yeah.
Mako essentially did my job before I did at Canonical, and deeply involved in Debian as well, right? So, give him another round of applause. So you can basically sum these people up as proprietary web service, women in open source, web development kind of mono-type stuff, OOXML.
Like I said, proprietary.
Opinionated Brit, and Ubuntu and Debian. So, think of some questions.
Oi. I am an American citizen. I will have you know, you limey. as you can tell from my native Californian accent.
Jeremy was the first person we asked to be in the Gongathon as well, and he said no. I was really disappointed when he said no.
10 years ago, 50 pounds lighter, yes, I would have done it. But...
So anyway, this is very simple. You have some questions, we ask the panel. So, has anyone got some questions they want to ask? Now, the way this generally works is you ask questions. Okay, well, this guy with a very unusual ponytail will kick it off. Okay.
Hey, David Schlesinger from Access. We spent a lot of interesting time talking about developments in mobile open source, the Collaboration Foundation, just a couple of days ago. I wondered if you guys have any thoughts about that, where Linux and free software is going on mobile devices rather than desktops and the like.
Ted?
I recommend checking out Robert Love's session on Android, which is, I believe, happening right now, is it?
I think so, yeah. You're in the wrong conference.
I think Robert's is the last session, isn't it?
Next.
Are you from Open Mako? All right, so here's my opinion. I want to interject my opinion as part of this mass debate. What?
Already, he's
Just got.
words.
I feel so pleased that you just said the word masturbate in front of these people.
Oh, we're not supposed to say mass debate?
I thought we had an arrangement, Miguel.
When Jonah does the video remix.
All right. So here's the thing that I think is a little bit surprising, and what I think is a challenge with open source in mobile. Last year, Open Mako was shipping these phones that was a completely open source stack, completely open hardware development platform. And we bought a couple of those to give to our developers. And, they work fine. They're advertised at developer boards, but if you actually set the latest updates, it works pretty well as a cell phone. It's really nice. And I really have nothing against them. What I find interesting, though, is that Microsoft has been, for ages, giving out Visual Studio for mobile developers, and they've been selling Windows CE for a long time on cell phones, and nobody really cared about those cell phones. I mean, nobody gave a fuck. It's not that pretty. Then Apple comes out. I mean, OpenMoko comes out. There's not a lot of momentum behind it. Then Apple comes out with the most proprietary locked device in the universe, but with incredibly beautiful graphics. And I bet you half of the people in this room have an iPhone on them.
Show of hands.
Leslie over there has one. Anyways, the point is that, and people had to break the thing. They had to reverse engineer the SDK, and there are hundreds of apps available for the iPhone. So my concern is that both OpenMoko and Android are going to be facing an uphill battle there because, as it turns out, pretty trumps open source and pretty trumps free developer tools. And I don't see any of the open source efforts or Windows CE matching the iPhone. So it's a little bit sad. But now debate amongst yourselves.
Applications can make the difference. They've only just started on the free and open source platforms, and essentially, the iPhone looks really pretty and it looks really cool, but if applications come out on free and open phones that are more compelling than what you can do with an iPhone, people will migrate. They'll kind of grumble about it because, hey, it's not done by Steve Jobs and it doesn't look as pretty, but if you can do more things with them, to my mind, the ugliest and nastiest device I've ever seen is the BlackBerry. Those things suck, right? But half of corporate America is addicted to those things. It's worse than crack, People will rip your head off rather than let you take their BlackBerry away. And those things are just nasty and ugly. So,
I didn't bring mine.
But it's the functionality.
I didn't bring mine up on stage with me, but the BlackBerries try and support a Canadian company as a Canadian. And I was like, yeah, okay, they say it's not supported with Linux. They really mean it's not supported with Linux. It blew my mind. Very disappointing for me.
Well, but still, the BlackBerry is an open developer platform as opposed to the iPhone. And, I run Google Talk and Google Mail on that thing. And, I really consider it a Google Talk device. That's what I use my BlackBerry for. I am my friends, and everybody's on Google Talk, so I just use that stuff. So I don't really, I'm an open source guy, and I'm going to run to buy Android just like we run to buy an OpenMoko because they were open source. But the reality, the sad reality is that it's going to be 0.5% of people that care about open source. The reality is that people are running to build, applications for the iPhone, and they're willing to give Steve Jobs his 30%, And you can see it in this conference, and you can see it in OSConf, which is sadder. People are not using Linux on their desktop, and they come up with the most creative excuses of, well, I really need to use OS 10 because, I'm not going to.
I play Pong with it or something.
Yeah, I really need to play Pong with the OS 10 machine, and Linux doesn't really have the driver for that. But a lot of people, OSCon is embarrassing. You walk in there and it's a proprietary world. Everybody's with a Mac and they say, oh, well, I run Linux on Parallels when I install it.
That's because they're open source, not free software people.
But there's a big opportunity, I think, for open source with devices and with really extending right to the desktop. If you look at it, nobody's really gotten down state, like personal state. When I'm in a meeting, I have to turn off my phone and silence it. And I have to silence my instant messenger and my PC. And I have to silence, whatever other devices I might have. There's still no convergence between just my personal state getting communicated across these different things, even though wireless exists on my laptop and on my mobile phone. And I don't see anybody solving that right now from the proprietary world. So I think there's a lot of room for innovation to go on.
On a related note, though, we've talked about the Apple iPhone. Something we've discussed in the show is Apple have created something that's beautiful in the software interface as well as in the hardware. With such a hardware dependency, did the panel believe... You buy me a drink first.
Can you bring him back a little further?
A little
more, Jono.
Do the panel believe that you can create a beautiful... Do the panel believe that you can create a beautiful device that is not only a hardware device and a software device together in an open source way?
GNOME is beautiful.
Yeah, but that's software. GNOME is beautiful, but it's just software that will run on any piece of hardware. I'm talking about something that's so tightly knit together.
Well, have you ever played with GNOME on, let's say, the Nokia 770 or what is it, the 810? That's a beautiful device. That is the only device that basically my wife will allow in the bedroom. I can lie in bed and
too much information.
Really?
But I can't use the laptop, right? The laptop is banned. But that thing, you know.
Did I miss a feature on the Nokia 770?
Well, it's the little pop-out thing you missed out.
Does she ask you to have it on vibrate?
Well, I have this in my pocket, so maybe that's a problem. I haven't really.
So I think
I'll
that the tools for, I think part of the reason that we've seen software succeed before hardware and hardware software solutions is that the tools for rapid prototyping and the tools for producing and fabrication have historically been significantly more expensive, right? If you want to make a different operating system for a laptop or a phone or something else, all you need is a laptop. You go into any computer software manufacturer on earth, and they're sitting at a bunch of computers that are identically like yours. You go into a hardware manufacturing facility, and they've got rapid prototyping equipment that is substantially more expensive than what you have. Now, the good news is that the tools for doing prototyping on the computer and either so design on the computer and either prototyping at home through sort of rapid sets of 3D printing and all these sorts of things, or through just sending off to someone who can get you something the next day, are getting fundamentally cheaper. And when that happens, we're going to see basically the manufacturer designers pushed out of the design business, because you know what? We as users of a open platform, of a free platform, we know our needs better than they do. And when the tools for taking advantage of that are in our hands, it's not going to take long.
So, do the audience believe that essentially we can have an open source approach to hardware? What do we think? Yeah? Who thinks that we don't have the ability to do that?
Don't now or won't?
Won't.
I don't know. I think it's still up. It's still up in the air. If open hardware is going to succeed. In particular, for example, Android is still not open source. We don't have the full source for Android yet. And the explanation that I've heard is that the device manufacturers wanted to get some special treatment or some special something. And until I see the device in the open with a full open stack, I'm concerned that, for example, there's these cell phone providers that like to lock up the devices, right? Like you can't put your own ringtones. So it still remains to be seen if even if we have an open stack, if in the end we're going to have an open cell phone that you can actually purchase. And there's probably going to be very creative excuses for why not, like Steve Jobs saying you can bring down the network, or there's going to be creative excuses as to why it's not open. But I just don't know if we're gonna see that anytime soon.
Right. Okay. Questions? Anyone else?
There's been some debate recently with OOXML. There's been some debate recently with OOXML and sort of standards in general, as well as the video on the web specking debates also. I was just wondering if you guys could talk about sort of what you see as the value of specifications, and sort of where they can go, and sort of what they can and can't accomplish. Standards bodies working on specifications. I mean, do you think that that's the solution? Do you think that that will lead to more openness, better solutions?
I think the specifications, excuse me, and the definitions of open standards that are done by people like the W3C are actually the way forward. I mean, they don't want royalty-bearing specs. Vince Cerf actually did a really good paper on what is an open standard and what does that actually mean. And having open source implementations, while not essential, is a big part of making an open standard actually usable and implementable, by everybody. If you look at, let's not go into the OOXML thing, because we don't have a big circular tub of mud, and Miguel and I really need to have a big circular tub of mud.
Can we dwell on this thought for a second? Let's go into OOXML in a second.
To successfully finish that debate. But I think that like the W3C standards are a much clearer example of what an open standard should look like. I mean, there's nothing wrong with vendor standards and people putting specs out there. I mean, that's basically what I implement. But there's a different level of quality that you need actually for an open and interoperable standard that most vendor standards don't reach.
I personally really like standards. It makes teaching a lot easier, makes learning a lot easier if you've got a consistent way that information is going to be implemented. I was doing some teaching at a community college on sort of web dev type stuff, and while Dreamweaver may change from version to version in terms of the interface, if you understand the standard and you understand the language, it doesn't matter what system you're using. You know that you can implement it. You know that you can transfer all of those skills. So I absolutely love the standards-based stuff.
I mean, in general, I think that a large number of these standards are primarily useful in situations where you don't have access to source code. It's interoperability between places. If you can move the source code around and the implementations around, then access to the standard is in many situations less important. You look at, I don't know, LSB, one of these standards, right? I mean, it's primarily interested. Binary compatibility is very useful in places where you can't recompile your software. And lots of other things are like that. I mean, that's not to say that it isn't important. That's not to say that having proprietary applications running on free systems or in a free environment doesn't benefit free software in the end. It may. It certainly does in some situations, but that's just not my fight. And I've found it really hard to become really inspired to chase down most of those issues.
So let's get back to the OOXML, preferably without the aid of mud.
You just want to fight, don't you?
This is.
Come over here. Come on. You want to fight? Come over here.
I'm actually quite scared right now. Now you're Californian and everything.
Won't let it rest, will you?
So, obviously, we've got a couple of differing viewpoints on the panel. Jeremy, do you want to start?
OOXML is not fit to be an ISO standard. It's not. It's written like MSDN vendor documentation. It's not. It's not what I would expect from an ISO standard, to be honest.
Do you feel it's?
But it certainly doesn't fit the quality of the W3C3 standards. I'm not even going to go into the whole. What's the most polite word I can use describing it? The disagreements around the issues that were had in various standards bodies, many of which I saw firsthand. Even without going that, just looking at the quality of the thing, it's not. It's a great thing that Microsoft documented this stuff. It should not be a standard. It should not be an ISO standard.
Okay, if you want to just move that microphone to your right and try not to make eye contact.
So so a few years ago, let me tell this in the way of a story, in the way I got interested in this situation. So I'm going to tell you 3 quick stories. Going to be very quick. Many years ago, I built a spreadsheet called Numeric. It's an open source spreadsheet. And I stopped working on Numeric around 2000 because we came to an agreement with Sun at the time that Sun would open source StarOffice, and in exchange, GNOME would stop developing Numeric and other applications that would compete with Sun StarOffice that would be open sourced. They also dropped their internal email client to favor Evolution, which was one of the products of the companies that was kind of participating in this project. And, you can never kill open source, so Numeric continues to be a spreadsheet that is developed. But it was my agreement at the time that in exchange for Sun open sourcing OpenOffice, I would not continue working with Numeric. But during this period of time, we did work extensively to reverse engineer the Excel file format. And it was an incredibly painful thing to do because there were very old documentation, there were very old docs that we used to implement some of that. But the formulas were not very well specified, and and a lot of financial applications actually depended on this. So we spent a lot of time reverse engineering this thing. Also, around that time, I got very interested in Latin America and how Latin America should not be buying proprietary software, because I saw the purchasing of American proprietary software as a mechanism for siphoning a lot of money out of the country. And basically all they were giving us was, a checkbox that said you can run the software. So I did promote through a lot of these countries the idea that we needed to use open source software. And I talked to as many politicians at the time as I could to convince them that they should standardize on the use of open source software, because that was the only way that we could plot our own destiny. Now, the third story was that Microsoft, I participated on the ECMA TC 39, TG2, and TG3, which is the standard, the bodies that work on the C# and CLI implementations. And when Microsoft announced that they were going to start work on standardizing the OpenOffice XML formats, I sent an email to the ECMA Covenant and said, hey, I'm part of ECMA, I would like to participate in this thing. So they signed me up, and I remember that the reaction from Microsoft was, oh, Novell is going to join to try to derail the process. That was not our intention. In fact, I told Michael Mix, because the first meeting was going to happen in 2 weeks, I told Michael, you need to go to this meeting in ECMA, and I still have the email. It's really interesting because I actually predicted how things would be back in 2006. And I said, Michael, but we need to get out of Microsoft. We need to do the same thing that IBM did with the C# and the CLI back then, which is we need to extract as much information as we need from Microsoft. So we need to come up with a list of problems in OpenOffice XML so that they document those things. And the first thing that struck us is this was our chance of getting a lot of the formula specification that we had struggled for years to get for both OpenOffice and numeric. So I said, Michael, the top item is let's extract the formula specification, which is not part of OpenOffice XML. And Microsoft was not very happy, but they couldn't really say no. So they added 700 pages of documentation to the standard. In the end, Novell, Michael didn't participate in the rest of the process. We sent Jody Goldberg, who's today its numeric maintainer, but was working on OpenOffice. And we sent Jody to work with ECMA. And Jody's focus obviously was the spreadsheet. So we submitted 181 errors at the time on the spreadsheet specification. Behind Microsoft, we were the main contributors to review of the specification. Obviously, we did not pay attention to Word or PowerPoint because we didn't have the expertise. And really, Jody was the person reading this review. But we were the main contributors. We still contributed, but we were the main contributors to OpenOffice XML at that point. So that's kind of where the involvement came from. And at the same time, what started happening was that some people realized that when ODF became a standard, it became an ISO standard. And just to keep things into perspective, ODS is it's a specification that is missing so much stuff. It lacks large swaths of information. It's actually very difficult to implement from the spec. What you have to do is actually go to OpenOffice, save a document, and then try to figure out what it is, because there's a lot of stuff that is not specified. And it was one of the concerns that a lot of people had against ODF when it became a standard. Many of the XML gurus, the guy who invented SGML, I forget his name, James Clark, I believe, this is unacceptable. We can't even approve this thing. It's a formula. It's not specified, and it's application specific. Basically, they said ODF is going to have HODF implementation will have formulas that are application specific. So, but ODF made it through ISO. Nobody really reviewed ODF, and there were hundreds of comments from the national bodies that went unaddressed, and it didn't matter. It still passed, and none of the comments were addressed. I mean, a lot of them were basically ignored, and they said we'll review them later on. So what happened here is that once it became an ISO, kind of the people that were motivated to kind of push OpenOffice decided that this was the way of pushing OpenOffice forward, not on the values of free software and not on the values of not siphoning money outside of your country, but on the value of being an open standard, which I understand is a good thing, except that one of the major pushers for ODF was the proprietary Lotus Symphony, right, which is incredibly proprietary. And IBM eventually did put a lot of effort in promoting ODF for an entirely proprietary product. So somewhere along the line in the politics, we kind of lost sight that what mattered was open source, not open standards, right? And that maybe the most powerful ally that ODF had was a proprietary product. So it became really a battle between two giants. OpenOffice XML certainly had a lot of problems on its first edition. I still consider that to be much better than ODF, way better in terms of what was actually specified. And as everybody knows, it went through a voting process. They lost the voting last year. 3,000 items were submitted. 1,000 of those were unique, so there was a fair amount of duplication and copy-pasting. And from those 1,000 items, were all answered by ECMA. And my understanding is that 97% of those were accepted during the BRM and the period before the BRM. So the spec is in a pretty good shape. So what I kind of felt was unfair was that open standards were used as a commercial weapon, really, to block Microsoft from selling their products. And I'm all for blocking Microsoft for selling their products, but on the grounds of open source, not on the grounds of...
How hard do you think it would be for Microsoft to put ODF support into Word?
I don't know. You were going to have to ask Microsoft that.
Well, how long did it take to put it into something else? So how long would it take to do an implementation?
How long did it take Sun to put it in? Not that long.
Well, it took many years for Sun to move from their binary file format to their first XML file formats, which was the SXW and SX.
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about how long it took them to put it into Microsoft Word. Microsoft has some very smart software engineers who actually have the source code to Word, which makes it a little easier.
But I don't understand, Jeremy. So put one into Word.
What I'm saying is, you're talking about it being used as a club to stop Microsoft selling products. So surely the correct response to that would be for Microsoft to actually implement ODF so that they can continue selling products and they don't have to say, I'm sorry, we don't implement the open standard.
All right, I understand your point, Jeremy. I would appreciate if anyways. The argument that Microsoft makes, and it's their argument, is that ODF cannot genuinely represent everything that OpenOffice XML can. And it seems that the engineers in the OpenOffice team agree because they're semantically different in some areas. So there's not a one-to-one mapping between the two. Now, Microsoft claims that they're not going to get the same fidelity in the documents. I, for one, don't care. I think it's a file format. I use text files to store my documents. So, I'm in a hard position to judge whether there's someone that actually cares if the title is a style or if the title is a,
But don't we make ODF better? Isn't the solution to this problem to make ODF better?
Yes.
It is possible. Yeah, I'm sure that it would make ODF better. There's now a committee at ISO for what it's called harmonization, where they're trying to get both standards to converge. And Microsoft has a great. I'm not here to defend Microsoft. It's a really awkward position.
But you're doing such a good job of it.
Well, I am, because a lot of people have made a lot of false claims, or they've stretched the truth. And in the best spirit of the Bush administration, they tell half truths. And and like Chomsky says, propaganda has always an element of truth. So there's always elements of truth in this anti-OpenOffice XML debate. And it bothers me. And it bothers me because I always felt that the OpenOffice XML debate versus ODF was highly hypocritical. And it reminded me the thing that I hated the most about the Bush administration, which was half-truths and double standards. And that's why it bothered me. And that's why it continues to bother me. That at some point we lost sight that what mattered was open source and it wasn't open standards. And we were being manipulated to basically promote Lotus Symphony. So
before we move away from OXML,
I think that's. Can I?
Go ahead, Mako.
So I was going to say that I think that Miguel's point about it being a fight between two big proprietary software companies about proprietary software for the most part is an important point, because I think that on the one hand it's great. We have a whole set of proprietary software companies spending lots of time and energy fighting about what they think the future of documentation is going to be, while we have a bunch of free software developers out there building the future of documentation. I think that can be an exciting opportunity if people want to come and actually do interesting, innovative work. In a sense, right? And I think that it's important to realize that I don't like. It's important to look and see who's fighting on either side. And I think that in situations where it is in large case, there's money lobbyists on both sides of the issues, and I'm a little hesitant to jump into that debate.
So most of Miguel's saying he lost sight of that open source was important, but if you actually look at who was lobbying on the side of ODF, you will find that mostly it was open source advocates in all of the countries involved. There were no open source advocates, or I actually cannot think of any other than Miguel and friends, on the other side of the debate advocating for Microsoft's OOXML format. So I think it's a little disingenuous to say that we lost sight of open source is important. All the real open source people, or I should really call them free software people, were actually there on the side of the debate, and they weren't standing behind you, Miguel, I'm afraid.
Well, I think you can be selective as to who were the open source people that were on or the other side. I think that, if you're going to say that Patrick Durousseau, which is the editor of ODF, is a shill for Microsoft,
who's paid by Sun.
Who's paid by Sun.
So he's not exactly an open source. He doesn't develop open source software. He's not an open source advocate. He's a Sun employee.
All right. Well, if you want, I think that there were a lot of lies, and just like the American people were lied into a war into Iraq. And
no arguments there.
They were lied into a war into Iraq with half-truth and propaganda. I think that if you look wholly at the facts, OpenOffice XML was a pretty good specification. And I know that people wanted to get even at Microsoft, that they wanted to make Microsoft pay. And I'm all for making that happen. I don't think that the end justifies the means. And that's a problem that I have in general with the anti-OpenOffice XML crowd.
Okay.
Jody Goldberg, which is not employed by Novell anymore, who was a representative in the ECMA committee, he's an open source developer. He's all for OpenOffice XML. So if you want to be selective, we can be selective, but the people that actually looked at the spec and people who actually spend time with the spec, not the punditry that, it got to the point where people printed stickers that said, have you even read one page, right? So those of us that actually spend a lot of hours with the spec actually like it. And people who don't build Office suites actually don't like it. So, it's a difference between believing Chomsky or believing Hannity from Holmes. So,
I spent a lot of time with the spec, and it reminded me of the CIF spec and the documentation that Microsoft released on the protocol stuff, which is good vendor documentation. And I will give OOXML that due. It is good vendor documentation. It is not a standards document. If you look at something like TCP or HTML or any of the others, they are an order of magnitude greater in quality than OOXML.
Okay,
I agree. Just one last thing. Just one last thing. Just one last thing.
One more sentence.
Like we say
with punctuation.
in open source, we're taking patches, and you could have contributed to the effort if you wanted to.
Okay, I've never seen a mic stand get so much effort.
That was that was exactly the point that people said to Microsoft and ODF. We're taking patches. Why don't you join us?
Right. Let's talk about fluffy bunnies. Do we have a question?
Jonah, I did warn you.
I know.
And you wanted to go there, right?
I know.
You just,
It's like my two uncles arguing. It's fantastic.
I blame Alex gravely.
We should all blame Alex. Someone with a question. Is this XML related?
No, let's make it fun, please, guys.
No?
I'd like to just say that I agree with Jeremy and Miguel.
Nice!
Hi there, I've got a question for the Jeremy and Miguel show, thank you.
Dude, please, make it fun, dude.
Yeah, it was more kind of on Mako's point that isn't the whole thing about fighting over standards, we're going on for years and years. Shouldn't the open source software community just kind of see past it, get on with it, go do something better with their time rather than argue over standards?
Let's debate that.
That's a good statement. It's very hard to do when you have a monopoly. So, you could say to the Samba guys, why are you wasting your time on that stuff? Go work on NFSv4, right? And yes, that would be fun, even though I'm not a big fan of NFSv4. But the problem is, while you have 95+% Windows desktops out there, the proprietary standards matter. So you can't just say, oh, no, I'm going to be above all this and go and work on something else, because nobody will bloody use it. It would be a waste of time. People use CIFs quite a lot, as you may have noticed. Sort of, if you try to count the number of people using NFSv4 and against the CIFs users, I don't think the grain of rice that would be the NFSv4 people would be noticed as it was stomped on by the CIFs users.
So in general, and something that is either implementing existing sort of specifications or doing innovation and actually building new stuff and thinking about cool things. Point is that both of these things are hacking, which is, at the end of the day, the thing that our community is best at, right? These standards meetings, if you've ever had the misfortune of being at one of them, are very long, are very boring, and are obsessed with things that are not particularly interesting, and that we're not particularly good at doing, right? In most cases, we are very good at building the technological reality that will inform those meetings. So while let them talk, and let the people from the companies who are our allies talk, and let's.
And I'm going to say something nice about Miguel here, just to get over the hideous argument we've been having.
I'm at the point that I really want the Gongathon to come back.
Yeah, and that shows you how desperate we are. But so look at GNOME, right? We needed a desktop standard. Miguel went out there and he built one, and it's one that is basically in use by. Or I'm not going to mention the KDE guys, but that thing rocks, And yes, you could look at it.
Next question. Awesome. I'm awesome. We knew that. Next question, the gentleman on the red shirt for 10 points.
Okay. I have a question about fluffy bunnies.
How about fuck bunnies?
Fluffy bunnies.
Oh, fluffy bunnies.
Fluffy, happy bunnies, and magic ponies. We have 5 free software and open source leaders on the stage here. Without turning it into a mutual admiration society, tell us about someone in free and open source that you admire, from whom you take inspiration. Somebody not in the room, so that it's not just a circle jerk to go with the mass debate.
Starting to regret calling this the mass debate.
The problem with starting in this end is I have to think a little bit. That might take
Well,
a
I'll jump
moment
in.
or two.
If you,
All right, go.
If you need to think, I'll jump in and say Angie Byron, web chick, totally love her, totally enthusiastic. She was one of, where's Leslie? Leslie was here. No, she's gone. Summer of Code student, came into the world of technology thinking that she wasn't quite technical enough, couldn't quite hack it, and is now doing absolutely fabulous things with the Drupal project, and she is an absolute inspiration to women who want to get involved in technology, working with the Lullabot crew, and just totally all-round nice person, almost to the point where she's so nice that you almost kind of don't like her sometimes because she's happy and perky and fabulous all the time.
Don't you just hate that?
Absolutely do. Who are these people? All right, was that enough time?
No.
Sorry.
I'm still cranking.
Well, there's obviously the superstars, but I would say that the people that I really admire is I've been working on open source since 1992, and I would say that everybody I work with has been an absolute privilege. I mean, you can watch a Linus Torvalds talk, and it's amazing, but you don't really work with the guy on a day-to-day basis. You work with the guys that contribute patches. So there's a couple of people here: Alex Gravely, Dave Camp, Chris Toshak on the other room, Aaron Buckover, Bedad. You know, I think I've learned more from these people and the code that they sent and patches and discussions than anyone else. So I would say the community that I've worked with are the people that I really admire.
So I mean, I'm a big fan of Stallman. He's out there like an Old Testament prophet, and I know he's one of the superstars. Everybody rags on him for all this crap, but he's out there and he's always right. I can think of Stallman's just always right, and he's like Chomsky out there. Nobody listens to him.
No.
I'm afraid he is. Everybody regards him as on the fringe. And you know what? At the end of the day, Stallman is always goddamn right.
It's true. It sometimes takes 10 years.
I just have to say one thing. I mean, I understand where Jeremy is coming from, but Richard Stallman spent 3 months in my apartment.
And I know you can rag on him for a bunch of things, and
No, he's not.
Probably wouldn't. Greater love hath you than I can say that. I wouldn't do that.
I've paid my dues with society. If I ever kill someone, the judge is going to dismiss. I mean,
you've served your time, dude. You've done it. And actually, the other people I'd like to mention, I mean, and the trouble is I can't mention anyone's name in particular, but I travel a lot, and the number of people I run into who say, oh yeah, I'm out there, and any company, any community college, any university, there are people out there who basically spend their lives advocating free software and implementing it and actually making it work for people. And they don't get on the news, and they don't get, they don't get sort of, 300 desktops deployed in whatever. But those people are out there, and they're making that stuff work. And programmers can produce all the code they like, but without people out there on the ground actually implementing that code, making it work, making it useful for people, and actually doing this, in the face of management who's saying, oh, just put a Microsoft solution in, God damn it, here's, here's a few $1,000s, which of course isn't enough, but those people are what makes this work. Those people are what makes this community actually work, and you almost never hear about them. They never get any press. But without them, we'd be nowhere.
So the person that everyone knows about inspires me a lot is Eben Moglen, because he speaks in paragraphs. Somehow, and has this completely convincing, unrealistic optimism. So every 6 months I go back to talk to him because oh man, reality is getting me down. And I come out, man, he's right, we're going to win, it's amazing. And then 6 months later I have to go back again and get recharged. So that's a very useful role that he plays in my life. And I suppose there's a lot of people who are sort of at the sort of edge of free software who are contributing in lots of ways that are not in terms of code, and I think that this is the future, and this is our this is what we need to recognize. And I can think of, there's a few people on the top of my head, but I think that lots of people who are contributing artwork, documentation, support, so on and so forth, are the people who are making this community work, that's so inspiring and something that I try to do more of as well.
Ted.
Okay, the smoke coming out of my ears. So I started thinking about this, and it made my brain hurt a little bit. But when I first got into this, I started blogging about how much what I was calling cloneware is out there in open source. And it was one of these things that really bothers me. There's all these shit projects out there that really don't do that last mile of interface or even the last 10 miles of interface stuff and really make good software out there. And I don't know if it would count as a person in open source, but one of the people that I've admired since I saw her speak at Guadec a couple of years back was Kathy Sierra. She talks about just doing the things that users want and really just generating the right kind of energy around it. So my answer is not actually her. I wanted to just throw her out there. I start thinking about what are the products or what are the projects that have managed to go beyond just replicating something else and actually innovating and driving proprietary vendors to try to keep up and catch up. And really, at that point, it becomes something like maybe Apache, but certainly the Mozilla Foundation has managed to put something out there where innovation came through open source and drove it. User interface and polish actually came through. You've got a product there that is actually better in all regards, and made Internet Explorer actually have to upgrade to version 7. And I think that anybody that can drive that, if it's a group of people or whatever, anybody that can drive innovation and get out ahead, those are the people that I admire. So I guess it would have to be Mozilla.
Great stuff. Next question. You've got one. It's OXML. We'll steer well clear for you then. Okay, let me give you this.
Hi, how are you guys doing? I've been kind of thinking about women in open source. I want to get some of your opinions on that. Given that, back in the 20s or something, when women were fighting to get, the right to vote and all that sort of stuff, and they really wanted to get in, and it happened. And I'm wondering, are we doing something wrong? Are we focusing on the wrong areas of open source contribution? As Benjamin was suggesting, maybe it's more than just code. But what's going on that we're having problems with women in open source?
I'm going to go last on this one so that I can disagree with what everyone else says. Go ahead.
I did a column on this a while ago. Basically, we are evil, misogynist bastards.
And we're not.
We treat women appallingly in the free software and open source communities. You can see that in the /effects, any female poster or whatever, or people get away with stuff that in any commercial company they would be fired immediately and escorted out of the building for. Seriously. And they do it because they can, and they think that, nobody's watching, and hey, I may have to behave at work, but, I'm not, hey, I'm going to let my real feelings show now. We just need to fix that. We need to make it as unacceptable to say those kind of things in open source mailing list projects that it is in corporations. And it's kind of hard. The other thing is I think that women are just massively discouraged in the educational system from taking technical careers and believing that they can do technical careers. They're just kind of frozen out at a very early age. And we suffer from that, and we see the problems because of that.
So I made this transition out of working with a lot of open source people into working a lot more in web technologies when I moved from Novell into Bungie Labs. My first experience there was to go to the O'Reilly Web 2.0 conference, which is coming up in 2 weeks here in San Francisco again. I did this 1 year ago. I looked around the audience there, and I was blown away by how many women were in technology in that space. And it's arguably as technical. So it's not a difference in technical level, I think, there. There is something, I think, about the culture in open source, and I think it may have to do with studies that have been done about how playgrounds work and how girls collaborate in games on playgrounds. Boys argue about rules on playgrounds. This is one of the large general phenomena that happens. And even if we look at the stage here, not to point any fingers, but we end up arguing about rules a lot of times. We get into these debates that don't move things forward necessarily, and women seem to collaborate a lot more, and that is a lot more in the web tech culture. I've found is it's a lot more about let's get something done, let's do something interesting, let's do it together. And we think about that. We have that ideal in open source, but then we debate about what the rules are for doing it together. So maybe there's something in that. I don't know.
I think we could maybe spend a little bit less time debating about rules and process and engaging in less process fetishism because it doesn't help. In addition, because maybe it's I mean, there are unhealthy things that go on in the community, and I think that we should address those. And if it in the process is able to improve the sort of the diversity within the community, whether it's participation of women or lots of other groups who are also really chronically underrepresented, then I think that's wonderful, and it's something that we should do. I'm also just very happy that this is sort of a problem that people now understand as a problem, because I guess I've been doing this for 10 years now, and certainly even 5 years ago, you wouldn't have sort of blanket recognition that this is something that maybe we should be doing something about, or thinking about at least, or trying to understand that it's a problem. And as you say, there's lots of places where people don't see it as a problem, and I think that we're making good progress along the first step at least.
So Emma, do you believe that this is something that's built into open source? Or do you think there's a problem in the open source community, or?
I can't articulate this as well as the original author, which is Philip Greenspan. But Philip Greenspan has a really interesting article about this on his website. And his thesis is basically that women are smarter, so they just stay out of some piece of the technology industry. So he talks about this computer science graduate that basically says, you know what, I'm just going to go into managing business or being a VC. There's a lot more money there than fighting over open source. So, I mean, I can't make justice to Philip Greenspan's article. I think that the second part of Jeremy's point is right. There might be an element there, a cultural element. But I think that Philip Greenspan's article is really interesting to read and has a lot of food for thought.
So Emma, do you believe that there's something in open source that these problems are very specifically in open source? So do you believe this is something in wider online communities as well?
Well, I think part of the problem is that we're focusing on an awkward definition of the problem. We need to have a vision for the future, and we need to figure out how we're going to implement that vision. And if we haven't got a vision, there's absolutely no point pointing fingers at bad behavior and complaining about stuff. I mean, ultimately, I don't think the vision of the future is at Slashdot. There's a lot of chatter there, there's a lot of noise, and they have a lot of the term getting slashdotted, but I don't think that's where the true innovation's coming from. It's where the noise is coming from. But we need to figure out why women are important. And if it's, hate to say it, but if we're important just because we've got vaginas, then yeah, we're never going to move forward. But if we're important because we need to get 51% of the population on board to move free and open source software forward, then there's actually a reason to get women involved. But you have to decide, why do you want the women there? And if you just want them to get gender parity, well, then legislate it. That's what they've done in Norway. Is they've said that 40% of all the boards of directors need to have women on them. They legislated it and said, if you don't do this, then your company will cease to exist. It won't be a publicly traded company anymore. So decide why you want women there and then make it happen. But you need to have that vision first.
Okay, I think we can get one very, very quick question in, as in one sentence from each of these people as a response. Last question. Gareth.
Does it have to be Gareth?
Yep, and one sentence. This means you, Miguel.
All right. Have you heard George Castro's impression of Miguel, and what do you think of it?
I fear this may not be one sentence.
Next question, please.
It is very good. It is very good.
Okay, with that in mind, please give our fantastic panel a big round of applause. Thank you very much. Just so everybody knows, the next talk on this stage is Benjamin Mako Hill, who's just been on the panel, so if you like him and his beard, come and watch his talk.